What is the biggest gap right now between what AI promises marketers and what it actually does inside a real marketing workflow? I'm very excited to have Weisi Kang. Weisi leads marketing operations at Glean. Had a very interesting career with companies like Rubrik and Medallia and Autodesk.
None of the challenges of B2B SaaS marketing operations have necessarily changed. The frequency at which we encounter these challenges has definitely increased.
But on the flip side, is that a liability or is that a gift?
Things just become a little bit messy once we introduce a little bit of human error at scale.
What would you advise marketers who run away from looking at the data in a very transparent way?
And then once you cut that channel, you realize, oh, all of my other channels are now looking a little bit lower than they were before, even though I'm putting more money into it. I wonder why that is. The thing that you cut was actually lifting the tides a little bit.
What is your perspective on build and buy?
Everybody can be a vibe coder. Could I get to it, using a team of data scientists and me going through everything? Probably. Would I get to it as quickly? Probably not.
Marketing ops people rarely take the CMO seat, but do you think there's a path for marketing ops people to become CMOs? Thanks everyone for joining. I'm very excited to have Weisi Kang, who is a customer, and I've gotten to know her over the past 2-3 years since we've been working together. Weisi leads marketing operations at Glean currently. Welcome, Weisi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for agreeing to do this. So, Weisi, what I wanted to start off with is your journey into Glean. You had a very, very interesting career with companies like Rubrik and Medallia and Autodesk prior to getting to Glean. So, tell us more about how you got to Glean, your journey prior to that, and then your transition into Glean.
Yeah. So I've been in marketing operations for the last 10 to 15 years. I've been doing kind of, surrounding the same type of work for the whole time. So I started off early in my career at Medallia with a lot of like campaign operations work. So I was working a lot directly with the program owners on landing page and email creation and all of that type of stuff. And then moved a little bit more into data and reporting and process. And so that kind of carried me through the rest of my time at Rubrik, at Autodesk, at Lattice, and then finally at Glean. I think the exciting part about Glean was, this was kind of a brand new industry, a brand new, very innovative product that I would get to be a part of. And so I think that was definitely one of the main draws to working at Glean.
Obviously, at Glean, you market AI for a living, and you're using AI to do marketing, both, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen you, very, very data focused, right? As well as very open to adopting new ways of measuring things and looking at how you can do attribution, measurement, etc. What is the biggest gap right now between what AI promises marketers on a keynote stage and what it actually does inside a real marketing workflow?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And it's something that we think about a lot, especially, in terms of our own product, but then also all of the, platforms and tools that we use day to day. I think, a lot of but because the industry is moving so quickly and things can, kind of change by the month or even by the week, we get a lot of those, really big promises and automating your end-to-end workflow and being able to have agentic workflows help you complete your work and all of that stuff. And I
Mhm.
think theoretically, I think that sounds really nice. And there are certain use cases where that actually works out really well. And that's something that we want to happen. I think in practice, we're coming back to like the foundations of marketing ops essentially where you really have to pay attention to your data foundation. You really have to pay attention to how you're relating certain things, not just within your database now, because that's just one layer of it. Now you have to
Mhm.
really start paying attention to how the other data in your system or as part of your work relates together. So things like documenting your processes or the way that certain metrics or certain processes are defined, how you talk about work and things like that. All of these additional contextual data points that any given LLM could point to that now become important as part of your day to day to make sure that everything is, documented, that it's documented correctly, that, everything fits together. And, from there, it's only then when you can say, okay, now we can layer, AI, LLM, agentic workflow, whatever, on top of that, because you have that solid data foundation to actually go and execute real work.
Got it. I think you brought out the context of how important it is to document, which is really the context of what you're doing, right? Not just do the tech and the data work, but also what is the context in which you're doing it? What are the processes you're following, etc. Right? Has anything prepared you over your career to this moment, right? In terms of being now ready to do this, because I've seen you very efficient and very adaptable to being able to do this, pretty fast at a fast pace compared to what normal people do. So anything in your career that has kind of prepared you to do this, or anything you would do differently to have prepared yourself to do this better?
Oh, that's a great question. I think two things. One is setting those expectations of, what needs to be documented, setting good, just solid structured data foundations is
Mm,
super important.
mhm,
As a marketing ops person, if I'm looking at a report or a data set, I should probably be a little bit more inclined to say, okay, how does everything fit together? What does this actually mean? What are,
mm,
the calculations behind everything? How does that actually work? So that, if I'm trying to convey this to somebody else, or that I'm trying to look for insights in something, I really know how things are put together. And then, like I mentioned before, it's kind of like foundational marketing ops work. We're never going to get away from documenting processes. We're never going to get away from making sure that we're defining all of our metrics, defining, what certain terms mean and things like that. Um, so I think, the things that we have been doing, I think, are just now more important than ever. Um, and with that, comes my second point, which is, in this age of AI everything, we're always, there's always going to be some sort of recording, transcription. Use that to your advantage when you're
mm.
documenting your processes. Sometimes you don't want to repeat yourself more than once, and now we don't really have to, which is really nice. And so having all of that additional context kind of sit within your systems already has been super helpful in kind of kickstarting that process. And then obviously, because we work at Glean, we're using Glean a ton. That also helps pull in all of that context and make that association a little bit easier.
No, absolutely. And I think you talk about it very well. Now there's AI and everything. So AI is democratized. So you can actually use all of the conversations, the recordings, the notes that are coming out. It also helps democratize the data, right? Because all of these recordings are now available.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, is that a liability or is that a gift, right? Because is there too much data? Now you have to kind of figure out what is the most important elements of data, right? That
Mhm.
you're actually getting through AI, or is that, and so is that an extra burden on everyone in the organization? I know you use Glean, so Glean brings all of the data together, right, in terms of knowledge and search and now the agentic workflows. But how do you manage too much data versus the most important data?
That's also a great question, and something that we think about a lot. Because we have access to Glean, it is able to surface a lot of information and insights that in a different type of way, in a more user friendly type of way through the platform. Again, going back to those data foundations, if I would love to live in a world where I could set up some sort of data foundation where all of the ways that we look at our marketing performance are predefined, and every time someone queries something, it'll pull up exactly what they're looking for. And I think that's something that we can definitely work towards. Do I think that we're there now? Not quite. But would love to get to something like that. I think in the meantime, it's really important to educate our marketing program owners and our marketing leadership about the business context behind a lot of the metrics that they may be interested in looking at, or having them understand a little bit of the calculation or whatever that is, or definition behind some of the metrics and insights they're looking at. And I think where LLMs really come into play, at least for someone in my role or someone in like a marketing programs role, is to be able to, stitch together a ton of different, both qualitative and quantitative data, and make some sort of, judgment call about it. Was it good? Was it bad? And then you as a business owner, with the additional business context about, why you put the program on, what the context is of your team, the company, whatever that is, can then look at that and say, okay, do I think that this judgment call was right or wrong? And kind of go from there, instead of, just looking at a bunch of numbers and saying like, okay, now what? So I think that actually, takes our marketing team to the next level there, to be able to think about the insights and the next steps, rather than, how do all these numbers fit together? And, you're not waiting for somebody like me to provide that proactively, which is also really nice. Um,
Got it. Got it. I think you hit on several themes here. Obviously, there's a lot of work like using the context, the documentation, helping the board or the CMO and other stakeholders understand how these calculations are done so that they can get a level of trust. Trust building becomes important, but also
mhm,
then giving them the ability to do it themselves because they're no longer reliant on this ask and answer loop that usually takes some time, right? So it kind of frees time for everyone involved because of this AI. You can actually then just ask and answer questions
mhm.
once that trust is established. You know,
Yeah.
so are you seeing that because of this, right? There's always this talk of peacetime companies and wartime companies, and peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs. Is AI changing that mental model? Like, what does a peacetime marketing organization or CMO look like, and a wartime marketing organization and CMO look like? Basis what you might have seen in your career and, at Glean, right? Because, you guys are growing so fast and you guys are innovating so fast as well, right? From
Mhm.
both from a product perspective and the way that you do marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I don't actually know that I've ever thought about it in terms of like peacetime versus wartime. I think for the industry that Glean sits in now, like I mentioned before, it could change by the month, it could change by the week. We never, you never really know what's around the corner. And so that gives us a unique challenge in marketing operations, which is, none of the things that we're working on have necessarily been different than what I worked on in the past. None of the challenges of, B2B SaaS marketing operations have necessarily changed. The frequency at which we encounter these challenges has definitely increased. And so, you're more than ever now, we're thinking, okay, how do we solve this in the short term? Immediately, what is the midterm and long term? And you know that in a couple weeks, your long term is going to become your midterm. So
Mm.
how do you more than ever think about scaling and what the future looks like? How could this possibly change? How can you build your process or your data structure, or this report or whatever you're building, so that we can pivot to whatever we need to. And so because of that, I think now that has helped us build a lot more like reusable and modular like features, essentially,
Mhm.
that help us become more adaptable. And I think that will kind of change the way that we think about marketing operations moving forward, being a little bit more modular in that way.
Got
I think in other companies and industries that I've worked in, that long term is a little bit more long than than times that I've had here. And so it's just interesting to kind of see how quickly those changes come up for us.
Got it. Got it. So no, that's pretty interesting. So it's kind of helped you become faster due to the modularity, right? And then the reusability, and then that kind of improves the cycles of innovation and the cycles of execution, right?
Mhm.
When we, in a lot of cases, when we are pitching RevSure, right, to marketers, marketing operations, as well as the larger stakeholders, we always sense this fear and anxiety that we're making that data too transparent, and
Mm,
correspondingly the performance related metrics, the reasons for good or bad performance. And sometimes it kind of threatens certain stakeholders, right? Because it's like, hey, you just told me, due to this, that this part of what I'm doing is not working very well, right? But you, on the other hand, have been very welcoming of all of the inputs and all of the various ways in terms of how you can look at the data and the various ways, and you can actually bring those insights back to yourself. And it's kind of reflects a certain level of, I would say, self-awareness, and being secure in the way you're doing things and how you want to kind of improve things. What would you advise marketers who run away from looking at the data in a very transparent way?
Yeah. 100% of the credit there has to go to my marketing program owners and just their general curiosity in understanding how their programs perform. And it's interesting the way I think that I've seen that them approach this question, which is, you know, not necessarily like how can I say how well this program did. I mean, sometimes you want to say that, and that's okay. And but for the most part they're looking at it in terms of, okay, how did this program perform, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we change for next time. Money generally, and marketing budget especially, is not endless, and so there have to be some decisions that we need to make about how we're using that money, what it's giving us in return, all of that sort of thing. And so they're I really, really have to commend them on how they're approaching that question. And so, when that is their mindset, they're looking at, okay, what are the KPIs that tell me how well this program did? If it went well, what do we think went well about it? Was it,
Mm.
the program itself, the content, the audience? What does that entail? And then also on the flip side, if something didn't go as well as we expected, why do we think that is? And kind of digging into now we're bringing in the additional context of, okay, why was the program put on? Who was the audience? What was driving the registrations or engagement? What are the different steps that go into that, and how can we improve that for next time? I think has really helped me as, a marketing ops partner be able to surface different types of data for them and say, okay, well, maybe let's try looking at it this way, and looking at it some other way, and thinking about that, and obviously leveraging the RevSure platform to help us do that.
Got it. Got it. So curiosity and openness to learning and constantly getting new information becomes a very important aspect. And I think that's the common
Mhm.
theme that's been there in the data driven world. Right. If you're not curious about what's really happening and experimenting, you're not going to be able to learn and improve the way things are happening. But how does that relate to the interactions with the CFO? Right. Because the finance organization is always about like efficiency. Show me measurement. Okay, why do you need this budget? And if it's a large budget to run even a experiment, right? Now B2B and B2C, are converging marketing tactics. B2B is kind of taking on a lot of B2C marketing tactics. But one thing that's still different is that in B2C, the impact of the marketing tactic is almost immediate, depending on the business and the product category. But in B2B, invariably, it takes longer time, right? So the
Mhm.
same tactic, although you can borrow the B2C tactics, the impact is still in a longer time frame. So how does the conversation with the CFO, right, happen, right, in such cases where you want to use experimentation, you want to use data, you want to use AI to continuously learn, but then you also have to explain to the CFO and the finance organization.
Yeah. So I think at Glean and a lot of other companies that I've worked at, we look at our marketing for performance from a couple of different angles.
Mm.
So, one angle, which is, I think a lot of companies do this, something from, first touch, or most recent touch, or kind of a one-to-one measurement of we ran this program, we spent this amount of money, and it gave us this amount of pipeline. Will kind of help establish that baseline with our finance team. And so, that's obviously one place that most companies start to kind of get that message out there of, what was the ROI of a program, and how do we justify spending more on a certain type of program or certain set of tactics.
Mhm.
So I think that sets the foundation for us. Actually, our finance team was, one of the stakeholders that we went out to go educate on a lot of the other different types of like attribution models and ways of looking at marketing programs when it came time to think about asking for budget or justifying budget for things that didn't look very one to one and didn't follow that straight line attribution essentially.
Mm.
And so having that foundation with them and that conversation with them, I think had opened their eyes to a couple of different ways of measuring marketing programs. RevSure can provide us, and then this is kind of that external validation of how the industry is thinking about this. And between all of those conversations and different ways of looking at it, I think we've gotten to a really good understanding of what that complete picture could look like. And yeah, like you mentioned, it could take months before we see any sort of relevant impact or any sort of impact at all of some of the spend that we've done, especially in that out of home realm.
Yeah.
And so I think continually going back to that education of saying, okay, at the begin, 6 months ago, we said that this is probably going to take 6 months. So let's check back in 6 months or whatever that is. And being able to keep reinforcing that because you've set that foundation with them, I think has been really important.
Got it. Got it. And in that respect, I think you talked about attribution. We talked about being patient to get the results. Like, has anything changed within Glean or within your larger ecosystem function or department and other stakeholders, like as to what is the right measurement methodology? Right, for a long time, people have been using attribution. We still see companies still evolving from first or large or source based to multi touch. Given that is a big cultural change for
Mhm.
companies. And now we're talking about incrementality analysis, right? Let's say you're running
Mhm.
out of home for the first time. You can't use a touch-based attribution. You can't measure touches usually for out of home, and you can't even do any other kind of analysis. So you have to do an incrementality lift analysis, right? And
Mhm.
then we're also talking about marketing mix modeling, which is able to kind of capture more impact of non-touch based channels if you're doing them regularly. So has anything shifted in the culture? Like, is now people more accepting of other methods compared to multi-touch attribution, or is it still a journey and that there are still many skeptics around it?
Yeah, I think it's still a little bit of a journey, but I think it definitely helps that we, obviously through using the RevSure platform have access to all of these different ways of looking at a single marketing
Clean.
program. So, for example, if we're running, a really big event or a really big integrated campaign, I as the marketing operations, person can look at that program through a ton of different angles and through all of through pulling the data or whatever for all of those different angles can then use that to craft one full story of how we think that this program did. And so you're not just relying on one model or however you craft the best multi-touch model in the world. You're looking at it from all these different angles to say, okay, why do we think that, these 2 metrics went this way and what does that tell us about this program? And, obviously with RevShare, we're able to do that very quickly. And so we're able to get to that, headliner like, this program, impacted conversion rates by X percent or by X amount or whatever that is. And so we're able to get to that insight and that headline a lot quicker. So we're able to move forward from there.
No, absolutely. The measurement methodology has to be combined with the context of the business. We've seen so many times the attribution or the measurement methodology, whether you're using multi-touch or marketing mix or incrementality, sometimes gives you different results, right? So, right, sometimes multi-touch attribution could tell you that, let's say, direct mail has a low contribution, but marketing mix is actually giving it a high contribution because it's able to
Mhm.
understand the role of direct mail in the larger mix of channels, right? So how does it impact your combined efforts with your paid social, paid search, and even with the SDR BDR motion, right? And
Mhm.
so when those situations happen, right? So that's where it becomes interesting because different measurement methodologies are giving you a different piece of the insight. And then you get a more holistic perspective if you can, if you can kind of have access to all of these tools compared to only one tool, which would have made you actually reduce investment in a particular channel, right?
Mhm.
Without realizing. that there's a different perspective of looking at the same channel. Like, has anything kind of turned the skeptic into you into a believer, whether that's part of any attribution methodology or any way of looking at the data?
Yeah. I think this is actually probably pretty common in a lot of marketing organizations where, you're looking at your performance on like paid ad spend, whether that's paid search or paid social. And I think that's a pretty, straightforward and easy one to look at to judge performance on. And, there will be teams or leaders that say, okay, this specific campaign or a brand campaign or whatever that is, or even a channel or a platform is underperforming. Let's not invest in that one and let's put our money in somewhere else. And then once you cut that channel, you realize, oh, all of my other channels are now looking a little bit lower than they were before, even though I'm putting more money into it. I wonder why that is.
Hmm.
Well, it's because, the thing that you cut was actually, lifting the tides a little bit in a sense of some of the other channels that are and how they're performing, and there was some sort of link or connection that you weren't seeing just by using one model and looking at it from that straight line attribution point of view. And so I think that is a really real time way to see that, I guess, like you kind of see it play out in your own instance.
Hmm.
But with something like a RevSure, we're kind of able to make that connection early on and not have to go through, a little bit of that learning cycle and learning curve of, oh shoot, okay, let's shuffle money back around again and look at that. So
Got it.
uh, I think that has been really key for us.
Got it. No, very interesting. And one of the key things that we've observed is that if you have access to these tools, you can become ahead, right? So we had one of our customers, uh, and he would always be able to anticipate what questions the board and the leadership would ask. And as a result, right, that helped him get promoted because, the advantage of having access to these tools is that you are able to anticipate, you're better prepared, and you have better answers, right? And very often those answers could be counterintuitive, but if you kind of take that in a well-informed approach, that can help you kind of move the lever by taking better decisions. How do you see something like RevSure or something like having access to these tools, right, play in your personal career journey? I know I'm asking a personal question. And how should other marketers and marketing ops people see, is this something that can catalyze their career journey to the next level in terms of giving them the right tools and the skill sets and the right approaches to be more confident about the work that they do and the recommendations that they make?
Yeah. I think RevSure has just made me a more, I guess, conscientious practitioner.
Mm.
Maybe that's a good word for that. So, in looking at some of the data models that our RevSure platform puts together for us, and some of the the associations and correlations that we're able to draw from it, there are so many statistical models behind it, different data models, different ways that our engagements or our account journeys are associated. Could I get to it using a team of data scientists and me kind of going through everything?
Mhm.
Probably. Would I get to it as quickly? Probably not. And so just being able to play around with all of these different types of associations, different types of statistical models, being able to switch from one model to another really, really
Mm.
quickly.
Mhm.
And just being able to see, okay, well, what if we did it this way? Oh, okay, that's not the correct way. Let's go back. What if we did it this other way? Okay, that's giving me something. Let's keep going. And being able to be iterative and experiment on my own has been really helpful in getting to those insights really quickly. I've always mentioned it to other marketing ops professionals that RevSure is like having a data engineer, data analyst in my back pocket, and having that available to me when it's convenient to me actually has been a huge unlock in getting those insights quickly.
Perfect, perfect. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's less about the ability of knowing the answer. It's more about the ability to figuring out where you can look for the answers. Like, how can you detect signals through the various tools, right? So if you become an expert in detecting signals through the tools that are available, that puts you in a better position Obviously, you need to understand the tools and have an appreciation of how the tools
Mhm.
work. What does a multi-touch method give you versus a marketing mix method versus a incrementality analysis or any other method give you? But if you have those tools, then you can kind of know where to kind of detect signals. And
Mhm.
that itself is a superpower in itself, right? So we'll switch gears a bit. Which I know we talked a lot about the AI measurement, right? Data, curiosity, and how we kind of detect signals better, documentation, context. How do you think about build versus buy? I know like engineering-led companies, we work with a great tech startups and obviously Glean and great tech companies who are very engineering-led and very product-led, right? And usually they like to build their own infrastructure, right? Whether that is for even the marketing ops infrastructure or the tech infrastructure, right? I'm sure if they wanted to do it, they would actually do it themselves, right? But in
Mhm.
general, the mindset is to build their own infrastructure so that they have more control, more trust. And it also goes down to the data level and how do you kind of structure the data, etc. What is your perspective on build and buy in this area around marketing ops, GTM, predictive AI, GTM AI, obviously marketing measurement?
That question has been coming up more and more than you realize.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, especially in this era of, everybody can be a vibe coder and we can, the world is your oyster essentially in terms of, what you can build via prompting or via, you know, um certain models or platforms and things like that. And I think I have to be a little bit more careful about that just in terms of, where I sit in that process of ideation to, bringing something to market. And I think, because of where I sit, I'm naturally going to be a little bit more curious, hesitant about that whole process. I think at the same time, those foundations that I mentioned before, your data foundation, your context layer, even the way that the pipeline in which you bring something to production or bring something to market has to be super well defined and super airtight in order for that to work as seamlessly as we want it to essentially. Um and so, having people that understand, okay, what does it actually take to go from something that is, individual created to something that is polished and ready for production. And what does that mean? And what are all the different QA tests that we need to do? What are the different security measures that we need to consider? What are
Mm.
the, all of that whole checklist of things that, us as potential creators don't necessarily think about have to be considered before we push something live. And so I think because of that, um because of this new development of, anybody can create anything at any time, it has, forced teams like mine to start thinking about, okay, let's assume that's our new reality. What would it take to, rethink some of that process in order to make this, a better reality for us, and to move things forward that way.
Got
Um,
got it.
when it comes to, our reporting and our data, I don't think now that there's ever a world in which you work for a company that doesn't have, a data engineer and a data warehouse and bringing all of those, data pieces together. And I think, the information that RevSure provides us can actually be, it doesn't have to be either or at this, I don't think at this point. The data associations and the amount of data that RevSure has can actually be an input into our whole, data warehouse builds, um, plan, so that we can make, our end insights a lot more richer. We're not saying, we have to use one platform or the other. We're leveraging, the best pieces of all of the tools that we have to get to something that we want.
Got it. Got it. I know, and that's the common theme that we're seeing is like you build an ecosystem where, for example, at RevShow, we are actually reverse ETLing a lot of the data that we build into our context layer, which is the GTM, very GTM focused, the data graph that we build and all of the associated taxonomy and associated semantic data model, etc. Then we kind of pipe that back to our customers' environments, right? Whether they have a data lake or a data warehouse, etc. right?
Mhm.
And I think you hit the nail on the head on in terms of like there's a whole checklist. If you wanted to build something, there's a whole checklist of things that you need to get done. Are you using the right measurement methodologies? Are you using the right resolution algorithms? Are you using, is this insight from AI trustworthy to have the right data input in itself, etc. Right. So I think those are the kind of cost benefit trade offs that go into a system and ultimately related to the complexity of the task that you're trying to accomplish. Right. Although AI can let you do a lot of it, but then how can you trust this, maintain it on an ongoing basis, and make
Mhm.
sure that it keeps evolving, right? And that's still a consideration for most organizations.
Exactly.
No, this is great. We are almost towards the end of our talk. I had one question for you. I know
Mhm.
you guys are using RevSure MCP in Glean, and and looking at various ways of using that data and kind of connecting to other data that you might have.
Mhm.
What is your personal favorite productivity app that you might have created for yourself using, an agentic tool, or whether that's Glean or etc. Right, as a marketing ops person?
Oh, good question. Um one agent that I've, created this quarter is, I'm calling it our ops, first touch ops detective. And so, this kind of goes back to the very, foundational way that we're, associating our marketing programs with pipelines. So, like I mentioned before, it's kind of a very straight line. We did
Yeah,
this marketing program, this person engaged, and now they're an opportunity.
got it.
And theoretically, we should be able to draw that line based on some of the ways that we use Salesforce and some of those out of the box features. In reality, people forget to add contact association. People forget to, book their meetings and log things, and things just become a little bit messy once we introduce a little bit of human error at scale. We're trying to get ahead of some of these questions of, should this op be associated with my marketing program, yes or no? So this agent will actually, it does two things. One, it will kind of check on an ongoing basis of, someone comes to us with, hey, I'd like to associate this opportunity with my program. Okay, this agent can then go through and check, okay, should it actually be associated? Why does it make sense? All of that stuff.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it'll look through, our Salesforce, our Slack conversations. It'll even look through RevSure to pull in some of that account journey and see what program makes sense, and
Yeah.
then kind of validate that for us and actually update it in Salesforce. In addition, it goes through on a weekly basis and sends me a report of, okay, these were the opportunities created in the last, 7 days. These are ones that don't have a marketing program association, but maybe that do need one, and why. And so it's going through those same sources and kind of making that judgment call. And then I can say, all right, looks good. And then it'll update, everything that I need to. So it's actually condensed all of that work that we used to do on, the contact research, account research, looking through all of these different systems. The other week I was able to update, 10 different ops in, 20 minutes or something like that. It was super fast, super easy. And I think can really be a game changer in kind of making sure that we're, handling that data association from all angles.
Got it. Wonderful. And since you know this machine so well, like in terms of like as a marketing ops person, you're building these apps and you're building these connections between different data sources and data environments. Marketing ops people rarely take the CMO seat, if I'm not wrong, right? But do you think there's a path for marketing ops people to become CMOs?
That's interesting. Now that you say that, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I think that can certainly be somebody's aspiration in life. And I also think, marketing ops, because we sit um in such a central spot to our demand gen functions, field marketing functions, event functions, all of that. I think
Mhm.
we're in a unique spot to be able to kind of see how all of that plays out and have the perspective of, okay, we're seeing how it all plays out, and we can see how it, works out on the back end, what that, association looks like, what the results look like, and carry forward those learnings a little bit more. So I think, take this with what you will, but I think just being able to use that, experience to your advantage in that type of role, I think is, would be key.
No, absolutely. I think that's I certainly believe that marketing ops will get upgraded in terms of, a lot more marketing of people will start becoming CMOs, just like product marketing, because you have a bird's eye view of all the programs and how they're working, how they engage with customers, right?
Mhm.
What is the role of the different programs in the journey? And so I definitely see that more and more marketing ops people will start becoming CMOs in the near future. Well,
Mhm.
thank you so much, Weisi. It was great having you, and we'll hope to have you again in another episode of the Moneyball CMO. Thank you.
Thank you so much.